Thanks for joining us on the first instalment of the Global Treasurer series, in which we speak with leading treasurers on what's happening in the Treasury world. And today we're going to be focusing on the pandemic. And I'm joined by Garima Thakur, who's the Executive Director and Assistant Corporate Treasurer at Ingram Micro, and John Jackson, who's Group Treasurer at Severn, Trent. We're here to talk about how treasurers have really been focusing on the pandemic and the sorts of things they've been doing. In the first half of 2020, we saw a lot of treasurers really focus on building liquidity buffers by going to the capital markets, raising debt. A lot of treasurers then moved on to improving their liquidity structures and taking other moves to improve liquidity. Perhaps we can start off with a question for both of you, and I'll ask Garima to cover this first. What areas are you now focusing on?
Thanks, Victor. And first off, thank you for having me on this first video series for Global Treasurer. Appreciate it. In terms of areas of focus, I'll talk about capital structure a little bit, just building off of your comments on capital markets. And your comments are spot on in what we saw in the first half of 2020. A lot of revolver draws, depending on the type of company and the industry. Whether it's cyclical or counter-cyclical, incremental credit facilities being set up, really out of abundance of caution and a fear that capital may not be accessible, maybe companies being jaded or management teams being jaded from 2008. Now, as we went into the second half of even first quarter of 2021, what we've seen is this is obviously not a 2008. Banks have remained well capitalized. A lot of those revolver draws got paid down. Incremental facilities were not used. They were expensive, right? So the banks made it almost punitive for companies to do this. And the shift and the focus went to more opportunistic activity in the debt capital markets. Record issuances, as you know, Victor, in both high yield investment grade bond markets in the US, new issuances, refinancings, just taking advantage of the pricing, the low interest rates, and optimizing the capital structure, just getting ready for COVID as well as post-COVID and what management teams thought the capital needs were. Yeah. And so I think that's been a key area of focus for a lot of companies. Another area is just building off of what we have been doing a lot in 2020, which is a key area of focus, is liquidity. And having real-time reporting and good information around what are the global liquidity needs that our subsidiaries have. My company is a very global company. We're operational in 60 plus countries. And so for us to have a pulse on what are the funding needs and to have not just the right amount of liquidity, but have it in the right place at the right time. And for that, we need robust cash reporting, cash forecasting, in-house banking, cash pooling, all of these structures. But add to that an element now of automation. So it's not a one-time effort anymore. We need to keep doing these things. And the way we do these in an efficient manner now on a go-forward basis is add to that a layer of treasury technology and automation. So that's another key area of focus. A third one that comes to mind is human capital, right? I mean, we're only as good as our teams are. Yes. Think about work from home and the challenges and opportunities. Like it goes both ways that work from home brings. Yeah. And, focusing on our teams and human capital is, I think, key. Last but not the least is forward planning. And I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, so I will not spend too much time on this point, is the what happens as we transition to a post-COVID recovery. And now's the time to start thinking ahead for that as treasurers and treasury leaders. What is the business going to need in terms of working capital investment, other capital allocation needs, whether it's CapEx, M&A, and do we have the right optimized capital structure to support those? And if not, how are we going to get there?
John, what about you? What have you been up to over the last year?
We haven't been too badly affected. And in terms of your question, what are we focusing on now? Well, it's really quite a lot of it is business as usual. So we're now looking to put in place the RCF that we couldn't do last year. We've been asked to look at whether we can increase our CapEx through what was called the Green Recovery Plan. and that may well require us to do more funding than we anticipated. But I think the main takeaway from the last year for me has been the fact that everything has been able to carry on. We've even seen new issuers doing virtual roadshows. We've not seen much dislocation. In fact, we've seen a huge increase in liquidity in the bond markets, and I think the bank market is getting to a point where it's fully settled down now. So for us, it hasn't been as tumultuous as perhaps some areas of business, like hospitality or travel.
But I'm just wondering, have you seen any changes in the way that you're doing business or the way that you're operating internally? Obviously, people working remotely, there could be ways that you're digitizing your own processes or changing the ways in which you're working. Is there anything that you've done in that space that you'd like to share?
I think what has been the main thing has been how robust our systems have been, and that we've been pretty brave in changing platforms and just carrying on as normal. I'm sure over time our business space is going to change, as perhaps we won't go back to a situation where people will be going to the work environment as much as they have been in the past. I think in terms of Treasury more generally, it's going to be interesting to see, because we have been successfully working remotely. Does that increase our ability to attract talent, not just from in our area, the local Coventry, Birmingham area, but why not France? Why not anywhere in the world can perhaps provide some services that we'd up to now have considered that we needed physically to be close to us. And that may also be the case, I think, in terms of funding going forward, where, as I mentioned before, people are doing what would normally take a physical roadshow, get the CFO on the road, go around the US private placements for a week. That's all being done electronically, and there may not be the requirement perhaps to go back to that. Similarly, in the banking sector, I haven't seen a relationship manager physically for most of the year, but we still have excellent banking relationships, and that may well mean that perhaps that may widen our ability to access global markets in the future if you don't need to go to physically visit Tokyo or China or whatever. Obviously there's other restraints that will have to come off as well, but I get the feeling that this is the remote aspect of what we've been doing over the last year has more implications than just whether we go to an office or not.
To add to what John said, and I couldn't agree more on the talent piece that you said, John, right, where we can hire more globally. I will say in March of 2020, I made my first virtual hire. Somebody I have not met till date, and she's a rock star analyst on my team. I couldn't be happier. Subsequently hired a second analyst on my team in December last year. The way we're recruiting now has entirely changed, and it's working, it's effective. And so, I do agree that that's kind of a key takeaway, at least from my standpoint, coming out of this pandemic, is work from home, particularly for an area like Treasury, where our work product is visible real time, right? If we're not doing what we're doing, bank accounts are not funded, payments are not made. There's a real time element to that. As far as my team's concerned, I can proudly say it's been seamless. The work from home has been a non-issue. Yes, there's some challenges, of course, and we miss that element of meeting with our banking partners, our relationship managers, getting face-to-face with our colleagues, and you can't replace that, right? So I don't know that it's necessarily sustainable. I think there's a balance there, but we've had some fantastic learnings coming out of this.
Well, I guess turning to the future, right? At some point, the pandemic's going to end. Economists are predicting a bounce back in the economy. How do you think that's going to impact you, Garima, the business, and what do you think you'll be doing as a treasurer in terms of preparing for that?
Just talking a little bit about our situation, we are our industry is counter-cyclical when it comes to the working capital and cash cycle. So when we think about 2020, there was an element of that countercyclicality that kicked in and allowed us to take advantage of some of the, being the, an IT distribution company, take advantage of some of the work from home products and the healthy margins that we saw around that. When we talk about recovery, just more generally speaking, that's going to look different for different companies. And the timing of it, is it a bounce? Is it more of a gradual recovery? Nobody has a crystal ball. Your guess is as good as mine. I don't know when it happens, how it happens. So I think that emphasizes the point that you want to be prepared for different scenarios, because we don't know when it's occurring. There's unknowns in relation to the vaccine, the supply chain. There's a lot that we don't know. And so I think when I think more broadly for companies and treasurers, including us, what happened in 2020 was there was an approach of holding back on some capital allocation when it comes to CapEx, M&A, and rightfully so. You want to have that discipline because there was so much unknown. We don't know where things were going, and different companies approached it in different ways. Permutation combinations of what do you want to hold back on? What is absolutely necessary spend right now? I'm not thinking the floodgates will open as we see the recovery happen, but there will be additional investment that CFOs and CEOs will feel comfortable doing, whether it's M&A, CapEx, working capital, organic growth related investments. And so from a treasurer's perspective, what we want to be able to do is be on the ready to support that from a capital structure, funding, and liquidity standpoint. So I think planning for that now, as I said earlier too, is prudent and the right thing to do. The other area is, 2020 was such an unusual year. A lot of the normal projects, treasury technology, RFPs, things that you would have otherwise wanted to have efficiency plays on, were put on the back burner for a lot of companies, including us. And so as we think about recovery, thinking of return on investment and prioritizing some of those projects to see how do those fit in from a resourcing and investment standpoint, and get those back on the radar would be another priority for us.
Fantastic, some good insights there. John, any final comments from you before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think there is an aspect here of big unknown, which is around the fact that globally, governments have been borrowing at levels which we would only ever normally see in a war situation. In the UK, nearly £500 billion of additional government debt. Yes. And that's got to be sorted out at some point, perhaps not now. They've got to get the economies back to working again. But that is a terrific overhang for global liquidity. What does that mean for interest rates in the future? What does it mean also for inflation? I think there is a big anticipation that we're going to a different world where the austerity days may be over, and that there will be a level of investment to get growth going again, and growth will pay off the debt. But it's going to be very hard for countries coming out of this with the level of debt they have. And I think treasurers need to be careful about what that means for interest cost and availability of finance in the future.
No, very good point. There's always that risk element, right? And that's one of the key roles of the treasurer, to anticipate risk and mitigate that risk. So, look, I'd like to thank both of you, Garima and John, for joining us. I think your insights were well timed as we move through the sort of maybe the back end of the pandemic. So thank you very much. That brings the interview to an end. So anybody watching out there, do please keep an eye out for other installments of the Global Treasurer video series to learn about the latest developments in Treasury. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Victor.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Garima.
Thanks, John.